Hail, and welcome back to my Magical System series. So I received a question a while ago from a viewer of mine who asked if I could make a video about familiars. So that is what this video is. This video is aimed at the basics of what a familiar is, of how does one summon one, how does one go about choosing a familiar and a deity perhaps that is capable of giving one familiars, and stuff like that. So I suggest that we dive right into it. So what is a familiar? A familiar is a spirit that is placed by the magician to facilitate their growth in a certain area or aspect in their life. Sometimes it is one thing, sometimes the familiar specializes in multiple things. For example, as I outlined in my August video, my rune video of the Elder Fufark rune August, where I had just returned my familiar that I have had since the 1500s. I talk about this experience with a familiar that I personally had up to well, this life until I believe it was the last year somewhere that we returned the familiar. But in that life, in the 1500s, which is when I made a contract with Lord Agaris from the Ars Gusha or Goesha or however you pronounce it, um, that basically asked him, among other things, to teach me the Elder Fufark runic system. Now, of course, at the time, the Elder Fufark was not yet rediscovered by secular science, so I obviously found out about this language through different means, most likely magical means, which is absolutely possible. I have seen, for example, dragon writing, angelic writing that is not Enochian, stuff like that. They are around if you know where to look. So basically what happened was Agaris placed this familiar, which was identified in the modern language to me as being a temple imp or palace imp or something along those lines. So basically, yeah, a kind of demonic creature that was meant to teach me the Elder Fufark runes. So now this particular familiar, this imp, was a rune master of the Elder Fufark, um, and specialized in it, and therefore was able to teach me the Elder Fufark. So basically, what happened is that reading the contract, I found out that this particular familiar was granted a quote-unquote cup of blood every month, and I think it came down to about an inch of cognitive space. Now, this is something that is not uncommon with familiars, where they get placed in your cognitive space, aka in your brain, or at least in the energetic portion of where the physical brain would be. Because your energetic body obviously does not have a physical brain, but it does, trickle over to and fro, back and forth. So that is something that you need to keep in mind, and we will be discussing that later. But the end result of this familiar across 500 years, or a little over 500 years, of this initiatory process of me becoming a rune master across lifetimes, was that this imp has been tutoring me, teaching me life experiences, causing things, both positive and negative, unfortunately also, but necessary, to happen in my life. And therefore I feel quite comfortable in saying that I have almost truly, after I finish my videos and initiations in this life on these specific runes that I still need to work through, which is currently still Lagus, and yes, I am still going to make a video on that, don't worry. However, Lagus has proven to be literally the longest initiation period I've ever had. As far as I'm aware, it may be that Wunyo has actually taken more time in between uploads, but active initiation, I would say, has been so far Lagus. But we will be getting on that when the time is right. But I feel comfortable to return to what I was talking about in saying that I am soon ready to earn the title of Rune Master of the Elder Fufark specifically. So that is what familiars can do for you. That is just one example, at least, of what familiars can do for you. So when I started studying magic in this life, I was a Christian earlier in my life, as I have mentioned before in my videos. So I was a Jehovah's Witness, but I've always felt a pull to the metaphysical. I've always felt a pull to the occult, to magic, to paganism, to pagan deities. The presence of this imp across lifetimes has facilitated that the very first system that I found myself interested in, intrigued by almost, I would say, has been the Elder Futhark. And the Elder Futhark was the very first magical system that I engaged with, that I connected with on a very strong, integral basis. Now, of course, now I know that that is most likely partially due to the influence of the familiar, but also because of my past life experiences with the system. It was a system that I have already engaged with many times before. Perhaps even before this life in the 1500s in which I made the contract. So, I, for example, also felt a pull to geometric magic or, uh, word magic, manifestation magic, things like that. These are all things that often stem from past life experiences and, in some cases, familiars that you may have from past lives. So, um, it has actually overall served me well to have a familiar place with me. However, it is not without its downsides, and again, we will discuss more on that later in the video. So what a familiar in essence does is stimulate your growth, your retention of information, the way you remember it, for example, your understanding, the speed at which you process and learn information, regarding a specific topic or topics. So there are many ways that you can utilize this. For example, if you were looking to become a great mathematician, the Egyptian god Thoth may be someone that you may wish to approach for a familiar to assist you with mathematics, because Thoth is, according to the Egyptian tradition, said to be the inventor of magic, the inventor of alchemy, and the inventor of math. So he would be the go-to person for any pagan who wishes to, study math, for example. If you look through the Ars Goetia, there are certain demons who will also have those kinds of capabilities, and often in the Goetia you will find things like "He giveth good familiars." So these are specific beings that you may want to look out for. Specifically, if the being that gives the proverbial good familiars also specializes in the things that you are specifically looking for. So you may want to, just download a PDF of, for example, Crowley's rendition of the Gusha or whatever to, look into that if that is the line of or the school of thought that you come from. If you wish to, work with goetic beings or demons, if you will. I personally am more of a fan of working with, more traditionally pagan deities, which is why I mentioned Thoth, and I'm mostly mentioning pagan deities because that is what I'm more familiar with, and that is more what has my interest and therefore my backing. So, if you wish to, for example, become a doctor, a physical doctor, or if you wish to become an energetic healer, like a Reiki, or however you pronounce it, specialist, for example, you may want to, for example, in my own pantheon, the Germanic Norse tradition, you may want to talk to Freya, to Air, because Air is a handmaiden of Frigg. If you don't know who that is, she is said to be a great healer. I have personal experiences with her as being a great healer. So she's someone that you may wish to consult. Freya is a healing deity. Isis in the Egyptian pantheon is a great healer as well. And of course, there are many other gods and goddesses. They're usually goddesses, but there are a few gods who also specialize in healing. If you wish to have assistance with riches, Njord in the Germanic pantheon is a great go-to person. Of course, Frey and Freya to a lesser extent as well. If you wish to have stimulation in the arts, whether that be poetry, music, Bragi is a deity that you wish to consult. You want wealth. Abundantia, the Roman goddess, the Japanese deity Inari. These are all beings that you can connect with, that you can approach, and that you can talk to on a case by case basis. Get to know them, get to know what they stand for, get to know their likes, their dislikes, and what kind of offerings they like, what kind of interactions they have with people. And don't don't think that just because one person has a good or a positive or negative or a bad experience with the deity in question, that it is going to be the same for you. They obviously are people just like you and me, and they have different preferences and dislikes, and they have personalities that may match with yours or that may clash with yours. So you may want to quote unquote shop around a little bit to see which deity works best for you and for the purposes that you are approaching them for. And what does this have to do with familiars? Well, familiars are usually given by deities or by the beings in the Gusha, or basically higher up beings who have more power than you or I usually do. Um, and you may approach them for familiars who may assist you with things in usually their specific domain. So the examples that I mentioned previously being the point in case here. Um, so how does one summon a familiar? Now, usually this is done through some form of ceremonial magic, if you wish to call it that. Part of the reason I prefer the pagan traditions is because it is much more informal. For example, if you read through the Gosha, you will find that there's like certain days and planets and stuff like that that you need to approach them under, and certain directions that you need to face. And now, there is some truth to this, I found. Obviously, the sigils in the Gusha work. Any black magician or ceremonial magician will tell you that. There are, however, blinds in the Gusha, in my personal opinion. I mean, the whole Christian nonsense of like, having to threaten them with certain things and stuff like that. It's all nonsense. The vast majority of these beings obviously don't subject themselves to Yahweh. They don't subject themselves to Christian energy. Um, it is just not what I found, and I think it was just written in a time where that was necessary for it to even have a semblance of credibility in the eyes of the church and hide from persecution and heresy and all that stuff. So I think that that was written in such a way for that specific purpose, and I think that that is literally the only function that it serves. So really, I would not say that you need to feel compelled to you know, do all that Christian nonsense, especially if you're not a Christian. It's not going to have power for you because it doesn't connect with your subconscious, with your will, with your you know, with your manifestation and all that stuff. So I really don't think that that is a is something that one needs to be concerned about. But to continue, ceremonial magic does not have to be merely beings from the Gusha. It can be done with pagan deities. I have personally the vast majority of experiences that I have with ceremonial magic is done with pagan deities. And overall, I find this much more pleasant. Personally, again, it's a personal preference. If you are someone who is, interested in working with the Arshgusha and the beings therein, by all means, that is your right, of course. But I find the informality with most pagan deities, and I say most because, of course, for example, the Japanese pantheon, as befits their culture, is very formal, very polite, and very, about ritual and proper greeting and stuff like that. And I respect that. I have worked with the Japanese once or twice, but overall, I find the informality that one finds in the, for example, the Germanic or Norse, which is my own main pantheon, like I said, where it's just like, you pour them some beer, you bring them offerings, you call on them, and they come to you, and then you start talking, you start negotiating. In the beginning, I did it very formally, but then I was told, "What's your fucking problem? Just talk normally to me. We're family. We're kin. Just talk to me like you would to a friend. I wish it like that. I find it preferable. Of course, the appropriate respect is necessary, but there is no hesitancy on my part or their part to say it like it is, to joke a little bit, stuff like that. So basically, with most pagan pantheons, most pagan gods I've found, don't grovel. Just you are divinity as well. Act like it. So basically, you set up a ceremony with pagan ceremonial magic. I find it, like I said, very informal. You just research what kind of offerings they like. For example, Njord, he's a sea god. Okay, he's a god of wealth, of trade, of getting land, etc., etc. So, if you wish to, for example, buy a house, he could be someone that you could call on. If you wish to have your business prosper, he's someone that you could call on. But I will make another video on Njord at a different time. So look forward to that if that is something that you're interested in. But these are things that you need to keep in mind. Research the deity, research what they like. Njord, for example, might appreciate an offering of sea salt. Pure sea salt. He might appreciate an offering of blue candles, of lunar incense, of moon incense, of water incense, a bowl of purified water if you have access to it. So that is without, the fluoride in it and all the chemicals and stuff. If you have a water filter, or you could, collect water from a lake or from the sea or something like that, and give that as offering. Seashells, those kinds of things. Freya may want to receive like erotic poetry, or red candles, pink candles, incense that has to do with lavender, roses, love, cats, something related with cats. Freya loves cats, for example. These are all things that you need to keep in mind when approaching a deity to receive a familiar from them. It's literally the same thing as you would with any other request that you would do or make of a god or goddess. So if you approach a deity to help find love, this is the same kind of approach that you would take with approaching them for a familiar. However, there are certain important differences, which is why we will be discussing those in this video. The one thing that I, of course, always say when making contracts, when making deals, as I have mentioned throughout videos, is you need to be prepared to sacrifice. A gift always requires a gift. And that is no different with a familiar. In fact, because you are enlisting not just the help of the deity in question, but you are also enlisting the help of a particular familiar, as was the case with my contract with Agaris. I had to make a second contract on top of that and actually pay the familiar himself. Basically what that came down to, like I said, was a cup of blood per month. Now, of course, in this life, as soon as I read it, I was kind of like, oh, you know what? This has served its purpose as far as I'm concerned. The rest of my initiation can be done through other means, which I figured out at the time. So that is how I'm currently being initiated after the August initiation came about. And I returned to familiar, but there were certain kinds of payments, like I said, cognitive space, which is again something we will be discussing later, a cup of blood, which I had no idea of, which may have been the reason why I always felt so tired, why I had certain mental issues, because make no mistake, if you don't pay a familiar, it is going to cause problems in some way, shape, or form. Make sure that you give your payment in the most convenient way possible, in a way that you can actually come through with your payments. If the payment is actually not seemingly very difficult for you, but it turns out later that it is, make an addendum to the contract and say something along the lines of, hey, I promised you X, but this is not within my capabilities for whatever reason to do so, and I would like to change the payment to that. That way you avoid having issues, that way you avoid having problems, that way you avoid animosity or disappointment from either side of the equation. So The very thing that the very first and foremost thing that I would like to recommend to you is that if you do indeed make a contract with a deity and or the familiar in question, usually both, from my experience at least, um, you will want to pay with energy. Now, what that means is that you are going to set a measurement of energy. So, for example, in the Agaris contract that I had, there was a measurement called a gilmet. Galmut, I believe it was a gilmet, Gilmud. What a gilmet was shown to me to be was I think it was about this big, so roughly the size of a European euro, the coin, the euro coin, or a quarter in the U.S. In terms of the coin, a quarter coin of the U.S. So 1 unit of gilmet would be roughly the size of that, of a roughly a euro or a quarter in the US. So I recommend that when you pay someone in energy, that you set a fixed measurement. For example, if you say that you want to pay 1 unit or 400 units of energy per month, and that's a fuck ton. Um, okay, so you pay 400 per month to the god or goddess that you approach, and to the familiar. Like you divide it, like this is a total payment. So, for example, you pay 300 to the deity, and then 100 to the familiar. Um, then say something along the lines of, I want 1 unit of energy to be equal to a 25-cent coin or a quarter coin as we understand it in 2019 United States of America. That way, if a quarter coin ever goes out of commission, or if the size of a quarter coin ever changes for whatever reason, that unit will forever remain valid because back in 2019, even if it is 3000 AD or CE, I should say, not AD, 3000 CE, that measurement will still be valid, even though US quarter coins will not be around anymore. Because of the simple fact that you wrote it like that in the contract. Be very specific in your payments, be very thorough in describing what the payments are, be very thorough also in how they are going to be extracted and delivered to the deity and the familiar. For example, if you pay 400 gilmets a month, that is going for most people who have not been at this for quite a while. It's going to be debilitating. Okay, you're going to feel very tired constantly. Because over roughly the average month is about 30 days long. 400 gilmets divided by 30 is roughly 13.3. Okay, so let's say you pay 13 or 14 units per day. All right. That is way more preferable than at the end of the month, someone just randomly drains 400 units of energy from you. It's going to make you feel horrible. All right. So I would advise that you also institute something along the lines of saying that my own spirits are going to gradually extract this energy over the course of a given month. And at the end of that particular month, my spirits will deliver the energy to you. Or I consent to having one of your spirits come here and drain energy from me on a daily basis and then collect it for a total of up to that amount per month. All right. And another thing that you need to keep in mind, there is a difference between generic energy or positive energy. And then there is dense energy. Now, dense energy is a nice word for negative energy. So if you consent to pay something in negative energy, which is what a lot of darker beings who would be considered, demons by some, um, that is something that many of those beings will want to see in terms of payment. Now, dense energy, negative energy, is of course generated by negative events, by mental illness, for example. Keep that in mind. Okay, so it is possible that things may go wrong in certain areas in your life. If you are willing to put up with that, all right. If you are willing to make that sacrifice, okay. You know, so these are things that you need to keep in mind when you negotiate a contract, and this is stuff that I have found out over the course of my, shamanic career, if you will. It is important that you understand the ins and outs of spiritual contracts because the spirit world tends to take contracts very literally because that's how they operate, and therefore you need to give a lot of thought on how to write it, on how to word it, and if your contract is pretty much ironclad, you want it to be, especially if you are dealing with deities who are on the darker side of the spectrum, because they may decide to take advantage of any loopholes in the contract. And that is a warning I have to give you, because not everybody is equally trustworthy. So this is something that you will encounter and learn from my past life mistakes that I have fortunately in this life learned from the mistakes of 500 years ago. So yeah, that is something I want to give you, because this is also the reason why I make so many videos where I have you write contracts if you wish to, legally get yourself out of Christian obligations, or, stuff along those lines. Like recently I did a video on the LDS Church. I will make a short addendum on that particular video if you happen to be interested in that particular, in those two particular videos. The reason I want to do that is because the Mormon church, the LDS church, now no longer adheres to the name Mormon, which I found very peculiar that they recently did that. So I will want to make a slight, addendum here and there to help those of you who will want to break free from that, but who have not yet had the time or aptitude to perform these rituals that I have described in those videos yet. I will revise the actual script and just, maybe record myself making a few things clear and then upload the actual text in the format of a video, like I have done many times before, because I do feel that that is a very important thing. Now, you could legally argue that at the time that a contract was made, it was still for most of you, for the vast majority of you who will be watching this likely in the Mormon church, that it will be, something that was at the time known as Mormon, and therefore it would still be valid if I addressed it as such. But these are the kinds of nuances, and that's why I said that you will want to have a fixed measurement for your payments that are both fixed in time and that kind of thing. So how to choose a deity to give you familiars. So my recommendation in terms of finding familiars, because the specific deity in question will usually want to get to know you a little bit. They will usually want to, speak to you. They will want to, read your energy and be able to, in order to be able to figure out which familiar would be best with you. And this is also why I would recommend that you only use a familiar for as long as you need it. Now, part of the reason why I'm saying that is because, as I outlined in the August video, and as I mentioned briefly earlier in this video, this familiar caused mental illness in me, which has still not entirely reversed. It is slowly going away, and I am absolutely not denying that a lot of that was the Christian influence, which is still also leaving me. Because I denounced all that stuff and have done very significant spiritual work in order to filter all the Abrahamic nonsense out of my system. But this familiar was in certain ways very much incompatible with my current incarnation. So this is something that is very important, that you make sure that if you have a familiar, that it is someone that is, if it is across lifetimes, if you wish to keep the familiar across lifetimes for whatever reason, you will want them to be probably less intrusive, if at all possible, but you may want to negotiate with the particular deity on how intrusive it needs to be in order to facilitate what it is meant to do in your life. So if you want to have a familiar, let's use math as an example for the rest of this video, all right? So for example, if you want to be a mathematician, and you approach Thoth, for example, and you say, hey, listen, I would like to have a familiar to help me with math because I suck at math, and I want to get better at it because it is a necessity that I go through it, that I learn it for my career, for my profession. For example, you want to be an accountant or something, and you need to have that knowledge. And you will want to, you will want to study that, be good at it, get good grades in it in your college career, in your college time, so that you may, understand what you're doing, obviously, when your actual career takes off. So you will approach them, and they will basically inform you how intimate the familiar needs to be implemented in your energy in order to properly facilitate a connection that will bring about the desired changes, and that will allow you to reap the most benefit from the interaction and the time spent with the familiar. So across lifetimes, I would specifically request a familiar that is less intrusive, so as to avoid complications in situations like I had, where you start having intrusive thoughts that are distinctly not your own, where you will start having, very strange thoughts that are just not yours, like you often see with OCD. You will want to, because it can be very bothersome and very distressing to have that. I once had a conversation with a viewer of mine who also commented on another video recently. And we basically had this discussion where it came forth that Christianity does this too, where it's induces you with a lot of needless guilt, where it will berate you over thinking certain thoughts, and where it becomes this very schizophrenic thing where it seems like there are two people living in your head. And in my case, that was actually the case. There were two people living in my head, one the familiar and one me. So that is something you will want to watch out for, and that is exactly the reason why I say that you will want to have them choose a familiar that is compatible with you, that is good at their job, and that is not here for any longer than you desire them to be here. So you will also, if you want the best course of action, the safest course of action would be, in my personal opinion, to also say that you will want the familiar to be removed at the moment of your death of your physical current incarnation. Why? Because, like I said, the familiar may not be compatible with your next incarnation if you are going to incarnate again, which, for most of us, that is going to be true. So, in fact, I would say that the vast majority of people will want to reincarnate at some point, regardless of what happens after they die. Yeah, how will one notice the influence of the familiar? The influence of the familiar will usually manifest mostly if you are not, for example, clairaudient or clairvoyant, which means either hearing or seeing the familiar audibly, which can be a little bothersome, I suppose. It's like having in my case it was an imp. If you constantly see a little imp following you around with his beady black eyes and his big nose, and it can be hilarious, but it can also be rather bothersome to just randomly see a black-eyed imp just standing over your bed. You will want to basically study the given subject. For example, math, as we outlined, you will want to dedicate some study time to it. You will notice that you will start picking up the material faster. The retention is going to be greater. In other words, you are going to remember things better. You may find that you will have certain words pop in your head telepathically, or if you are clairaudient, you will possibly hear it physically. Answers may be given to you at times. For example, if you are in college, you may have, if you really don't know the answer, but you need to pass, and for some reason you didn't have time to study, you may find all sorts of, pretty cool, awesome things happen. I have found this with my Elder Futhark studies, especially in the beginning. I found it very helpful. I found myself, like I said, intrigued, which means that if you find yourself intrigued with things, you will want to study more. So your motivation will go up. Your in terms of studying that specifically. Now, one does need to be aware. The particular familiar I had was very obsessive, um, and he kind of almost wanted me to push myself to constantly engage with magic, which in terms of um, learning things is actually really helpful. But make sure that it does not become a detriment to your social life, for example, or to your happiness in general, or that it does not start interfering with your finances or your love life, etc., etc. So these are things that I do want to be aware of because especially with beings who are a little darker, they will think, I'm here to do a job, and I'm going to do that fucking job. I get paid for it, and you are going to work with me because this is what you requested. Some may be a little more considerate. It really does depend on the individual that you approach for the familiar. It does depend on the familiar that gets selected for you. And, the results will be positive if you know how to handle it, if you know how to avoid pitfalls and caveats, which I have briefly outlined in this video, of course. So, to resume the benefits of what you may find that things may come intuitively to you, that you may start seeing patterns. For example, with math, of course, you deal a lot with numbers. You may start seeing the patterns and the mechanics of things more clearly and more easily. Um, you may start finding yourself having your eye fall on particular websites or on particular books if you're in a bookstore. You may find the urge to go to a bookstore, even if it is for something completely unrelated. Okay, for example, you suddenly feel the need to go buy Lord of the Rings in a bookstore. And then you go to that bookstore and they have a very good math book on sale. These are all situations that you will find synchronizing in order to help you facilitate your studies and your learning in a particular topic. Because that is what I found with my, when I started my Elder Fufark studies. Um, I don't know why I did it, but I was about to move. This was the last move before I moved to the United States. And I just found myself feeling the urge to go rent a bungalow all by myself. So I'm in my mid-20s at that point. I didn't have a girlfriend or anything, but I just felt the need to just, it wasn't like a romantic retreat or anything. It was not even a vacation. I just felt the need to get away from shit and just focus on studying my magic. And I did. And I just felt the need to do that. And I rented the bungalow. I went there for a week. I started having really weird experiences in that bungalow. I heard like music playing, and I started hearing voices. And I do believe that bungalow actually was haunted, because I did feel like, certain spirits, and I felt a portal in there. And, um, it was pretty interesting. But I just during that bungalow, I made my first during that bungalow visit, that bungalow stay, I made my very first rune set. I devised a makeshift ritual, and everything went from there. I started doing readings for people in a group that I was in at the time. Which is a pretty nasty story how that ended, but that's not really the point. Um, the point was that I started doing things that I had never really even thought of doing. And I do very firmly believe that, especially initially, this was due to the help of the familiar who was stimulating this curiosity and this desire to investigate and to experiment with certain magical things. Like I bought a bag of black tourmaline stones, like very small chips, and I literally just grabbed some paint and I started painting my runic symbols on there. I had my internet connection there. I looked up online what the runes meant and very basic rudimentary meanings to the divinatory explanations of the Elder Futhark, and that's literally how it began. And from there, my interest in the Elder Futhark just snowballed and snowballed and snowballed. So familiars can play a very integral part in your magical development, but also in your secular, everyday life developments. They can even assist with romance, for example. As I outlined in my AWAS video, I had a corrupted fetch that was caused by certain, things and events that happened, and I approached Freya and I said, "Hey, listen, my fetch is corrupted, and I need that, or at least I want that fetch to be healed and cleansed and rejuvenated." And yeah, Freya literally gave me a new fetch, who is helping me heal that other fetch, which is going great from what I can tell, and to assist me in my romantic and sexual endeavors. So these are merely just minor examples of what a familiar can do with you. It's again a one-on-one video, but you get the gist of it, I hope. And you will see, I promise you, very significant increases in the area or areas in which for which you have enlisted the familiar. The only warning, that, like I said, that I would give you is be careful with what you agree to in terms of how they are placed. Be careful with how much you are sacrificing. As the Havamal says, better not to send than to overspend. Be careful that you do not give away more than you need to, basically. Um, I mean, Odin once said to me, also, don't dedicate yourself to anybody. You don't need to. Approach the being that you are approaching for a familiar with dignity, with respect, but also talk to them as equals. They may be greater in power than you, but that does not necessarily have to remain the case. Because that is, of course, in my opinion, the goal of every magician to, ascend to a higher plane of being. Magic is ultimately, to me, about self-development, about ascension, about becoming a more powerful, better person, and to on the side, enjoy life in terms of love, sex, romance, finances, that sort of thing. But these are obviously also things that you need in order to, to facilitate your growth. Having a stable living condition, a stable finance base, a stable love life, a stable social life. These are all things that are important in order for the magician to truly have the time to sit down and to to grow. So in fact, I would say that initially magic should be used for, removing blockages, and then for establishing a solid framework in one's life, and then to focus on empowering oneself to the fullest. But that is my personal philosophy and my personal approach to magic. And it has worked for me so far, and it is working out currently. So partially thanks to and with the help of a familiar that a past life incarnation of mine 500 years or so ago, facilitated. So, I hope that that provides you some basic insights and some basic information. I am aware that this is a rather complicated topic, so please, if you have any questions, please let me know down below. I may make a follow-up video, or I may respond to you in a comment. I had another person who mentioned, who I mentioned earlier in the video, that same user. They mentioned something in my sex magic video, which I will also make a follow-up video on. I have decided that I will do that because I found it a very interesting point that they put forward. So look forward to seeing something like that in the future, and hopefully my Lagus initiation will be drawing to a close soon. I mean, it's been months, and it's been a very thorough, rigid, tough initiation, but I do feel that it is coming to a close, and it has absolutely brought about some very significant, very powerful, but along the way, very exhausting, uh, changes and influences in my life. So I look forward to hopefully presenting you the Lagus Elder Fuvark 101 series video. And yeah, thank you all so much for watching. I hope to catch you next time in whatever video I am uploading next time. So I hope you all have a great day. Like, subscribe, comment down below. You know the drill. So thank you all, and I hope you have a great day. Hail.